OK, right, let's move on to the front cover of the Telegraph, Friday's Telegraph. Leo, what are they going with?
So Suella Braverman says Islamists are in charge of Britain now. This is an article for the Telegraph in which she said Britain was sleepwalking into a ghettoised society. I don't think we're sleepwalking. I think the wokists are actively planning this ghettoised society that's going to threaten free expression and British values in the wake. This is in the wake of the Commons chaos
Yes.
when the Speaker was they're supposed to table an SNP motion, and then he threw away the rules and allowed Labour to chair the sort of surprise motion.
Well, the motion wasn't one that Labour were happy with because the SNP's phrasing was about it was condemning the Israeli state effectively,
Right.
and Labour wanted to be able to call for a ceasefire without that wording.
Well, and what the Speaker said was that he had to, or what people are saying is he had to do it. He had to allow this watered down bill with a different wording because Labour politicians were getting death threats from Islamists. So this is political oppression in the United Kingdom. It's Islamists threatening politicians, and we've seen these are real threats. David Amess was killed by an Islamist. We've seen lots of other politicians. I think Mike Freer had to stand down. Other politicians have said their families have been threatened, their wives have been threatened with rape. It's absolutely, abhorrent stuff.
So we're not clear at the moment. Some people have suggested that Keir Starmer had urged Lindsay Hoyle to make this decision
to protect the MPs,
to protect his MPs, to stop a rebellion of his MPs against him, and that would be the leader of the opposition putting pressure on the Speaker, who's meant to be impartial. That would be scandalous enough. But Lindsay Hoyle did explicitly say, what we do know is he did say that he was very, very worried about the security of MPs. So what you've just been saying, Leo, I think seems pretty definite that he thinks there are an activist contingent that are threatening MPs and will carry out those threats. And therefore he has to throw out the Commons Convention, the Convention of the House. That to me is very frightening because what that means is our democracy is effectively capitulating to far left agitators and Islamist extremists. Paul?
And you have to capitulate because if you don't capitulate, you have to admit there's an issue. And that's a massive problem for a lot of people in the House, even on both sides. I mean, Andrew Percy, who was on the channel earlier on today, he spoke out today. And it was that led Lindsay Hoyle.
No relation to me.
No relation at all. To make those comments. And I think we'd be much better to come at this from the other way around and just openly admit it. We were talking about free speech earlier. I think people should be able to say what they like. I think you can, plaster what you like on Big Ben, but let's always have open and honest debate about it. Let's talk about who the perpetrators are.
You're absolutely right that they won't address this. After the murder of David Amess, absolutely horrific attack by an Islamist radical, they started talking in Parliament about how they wanted to police people's tweets a bit more, clamp down on hate speech. It had literally nothing to do with what happened. Well, they don't want to address the problem.
Nobody can address the problem because if you address the problem, you get called racist and Islamophobic, and that's the worst thing that can happen to a politician. I mean, people lose their careers over stuff like that. I mean, we've seen this for decades now. Since Salman Rushdie was threatened, we've seen the Batley Grammar School, we've seen Lee Rigby being beheaded. There's been a lot of incidents that should have been an absolute inflection point in society where we're like, we need to get a grip on this, but it's easier to just keep kicking the can down the road and hope somebody else is going to deal with it, but eventually it's going to reach some point. We're going to have, there's going to be some sort of horrific incident. I don't know what could be more horrific than, the Manchester Arena bombing, but there's going to be something horrific that's going to force the government's hand.
I think at some point you're right. They're going to have to deal with it, aren't they? Now, also on the front cover of the Telegraph, we have this picture of the Russian soldier. What's this article about?
Yeah, so this is about Avdiivka has fallen in Ukraine. This is a Ukrainian soldier saying, I have the Russian soldiers in my sights, but no shells to fire at them. And this is pretty devastating. So America's been unable to pass this bill to provide aid to Ukraine. People think that, this money's getting sent to Ukraine. They don't get the money. The money gets spent in America, or money that we donate gets spent in the UK and gets spent on munitions, either to replace the old munitions that we've given to Ukraine or to build or to create new ones. And Russia, obviously, doesn't have this problem. Vladimir Putin, he's ramped up manufacturing of his arms. He's really got this war economy going. And we're at this critical point where Ukraine is actually destroying so many vehicles, so many Russian tanks. In the war of attrition, they're really winning. It's about 5-1 in terms of how many tanks and troops are.
Is that right?
Yeah. Until Avdiivka fell, because Russians are on the attack, so they're rolling these tanks across open ground, and Ukraine's been just picking them off with artillery, picking them off with drones, and all the rest of it. The worry is now that Ukraine doesn't have the resources to do that. So now Russia can not only attack Ukraine, but it's building up, it's ramping up production. So now it's going to be they've already said we're going to possibly attack the Baltics. They've also made very clear statements that they're going to attack Moldova.
Yeah.
So, and Russia's spend, according, if you include purchasing power parity, is actually greater. They get more bang for their buck. Their spend is greater than the entire EU military budget.